Hello and welcome to the Oxford German Classic podcast. My name is Santhia Velasco Kittlaus. I'm a graduate student in the subfaculty of German here at Oxford, and I also coordinate this year's German Classic Prize competition. We host this podcast today to talk about Kafka's Der Heizer, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Meindert with me here today. Hello.
Hi.
He is a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at the Faculty of Medieval and Modern Languages here at Oxford, and also a Junior Research Fellow at New College.
That's right.
Thank you for joining me today.
Of course.
Very
Thank
happy
you for
to have
having
you
me.
here. Yeah, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Whereabouts are you from and how long have you been at Oxford?
So I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've been at Oxford for, I think, 9 years now, with a couple of years absence, coming back. And so that's how long I've been here. I did my MPhil here and then my DPhil, and now I'm a Junior Research Fellow.
And I have to mention this, before you became an academic, you were a professional ballet dancer.
That's right, yeah.
Which is really interesting. Tell me about that.
So from the age of 4, I was always doing ballet, and then I pursued a professional career in Germany, and that's where my interest in German culture and German literature comes from. So I did that, and then I went back to academic studies after my career.
And what was it that made you curious about the academic career, or about becoming a scholar?
I think it's the contrast with dancing, because dancing was all about body and performance, and I felt that the intellectual side was missing. And so I went the other way and went fully into a career of the mind, so to say, and now realizing that a combination might be nice to also do more practical stuff.
So what is your current research about?
So my current research is actually about ballet adaptations of modernist literature. So in the last 20 years, there have been a lot of adaptations into dance of early 20th century European texts, and I look at how they are put on the stage. So a good example is a recent adaptation of Kafka's The Metamorphosis by the choreographer Arthur Pita for the Royal Ballet, which is a wonderful ballet adaptation which I look at.
And it's the text that most of our listeners will know because they study it for the A-levels.
That's great. Yeah.
Do they use an actual beetle in that adaptation?
No, so the beetle is danced by a person, and so the movements are very extreme and very interesting.
Oh.
And so I look both at how the beetle is imagined in the human body, and then also at what that adaptation tells us about, or gives us new insights into the original text.
Mm-hmm. So they try to dance creaturely movements, so
That's
to say,
right,
to
yeah.
make it a bit uncanny even.
Yeah. To reveal just a bit of this research, it's quite interesting to find all these extreme movements in the choreography that normally as humans we don't. All these abilities that we actually have in the body that we never use, and it's quite an interesting insight in the original text about, what's the contrast with everyday human life and then turning into a beetle and exploring new ways of moving around in the world, which is also something that we will hopefully talk about.
Definitely. Talking about everyday human life, why are you interested in Kafka?
Why am I interested in Kafka? I don't know, he's very attentive to human gestures and to the body, and he's also quite funny, which I like, and often the funniness is kind of a slapstick comedy which has to do with the body. So, there's a lot for me to explore there in terms of the body, which is really my core interest in literary texts.
That is really interesting that you say it is funny to you, as I have the feeling, and I live in a different body than you, first of all, right? But from my reading, these gestures that he describes are rather awkward to a certain extent, and sometimes they shock me, they make me really, feel uncomfortable with the text, which I'm fascinated by.
Well, that's part of this slapstick as well, right? That it's an awkward kind of movement that then can be funny. I mean, it really depends on your reading, I think. Some people find it hilarious, and other people really respond very differently. I mean, I'm not sure that the Stoker is the best example of a funny embodiment, but if there are moments where it's quite funny. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Stoker or der Heizer. What do you think about this text in particular?
So, I mean, for this podcast, I was going through it again and looking in very detail at all the movements. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to know, but one is Carl's passivity and how he's largely moved by other people, and then he finds some agency, but there's a lot of people pushing him into directions, especially the Stoker at the beginning.
And his parents, to begin with, who literally placed him on that ship to send him off.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So he's already, and he's also in a unknown space and going into an unknown country and unknown territory, and so like how does that manifest in the body is quite an interesting theme. And so the idea of failure of movement and not quite hitting the mark with your movements also is a larger theme in Kafka, but you also find it here. For example, when he tries to tramp on the rat, and he misses the rat and actually helps the rat get away instead.
Wow. Or at the very beginning, this is a scene I have in mind when he tries to leave the ship and he fails. And the masses, so to say, so everyone else goes and leaves the ship and starts their new life. And he has to go back because he lost his umbrella. So he's literally moving away from the others already and failing to leave the ship.
That's right. Yeah. That's a very good point. And then, kind of, also the accident of just knocking ending up at a random door and then knocking on that door, like without actually any kind of sense of why or
This is an interesting one. What do the gestures tell us about Carl's thinking in a way? Big question.
Big question. I mean, there seems to be if we take thinking maybe more largely than just reflection, right? And like maybe as awareness, then one of the things that's interesting is exactly like not being very aware of his own body in space, and failing to accurately execute his movement around space. So one of the first quite funny moments, I think, is when he tries to get into the bed of the Stoker and he fails. He actually laughs at himself for failing to do this movement. So that would be, one of the ways in which I think movement kind of illuminates how he thinks, but also maybe the lack of agency, right? So of instead of making choices, he just kind of gets moved around space. If you want me to illuminate this, well, like a good example is kind of going into the Stoker's room, and first of all, the Stoker kind of closes the door so that he has to come in, and then tells him to go on the bed, and then like pushes him further into the corner, and then puts his feet onto the bed so that he even has to go even further into the corner. It's quite funny, actually.
It is, and Carl actually enjoys it.
Yeah.
So he feels comfortable in this room and at home to a certain
in this
extent.
role,
in this role especially,
That's right.
And it's not necessarily about his age, I think, because we could say he's rather young, he's on the threshold to become a man, but I don't think it is that. It's a certain position he doesn't really take, but he accepts.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Though that could be an argument about more generally, like the not going back to the point about not controlling his body. That maybe he's 16, right? So like his body is still developing. We all kind of remember what it was like when suddenly, at least I'm very tall, so when you suddenly grow a lot and like you have to navigate this new body, and it's quite awkward. And that's what I was thinking about in terms of.
I remember that as well. and I'm not tall, but a woman, and that's a different story as well, you know.
Exactly.
And you have to deal with it. And sometimes it's attached to a lot of shame and not knowing what to do with it, which Carl, to a certain extent, reflects as well, I think. But there's more to that, as he's quite traumatized by the events that happened to him, and which are the reason why he actually had to leave his home.
Right. And which is another scene in which is very passive, in which, you know, he's being kind of guided into a sexual moment that he doesn't want to have.
Yeah. Shall we do a close reading of that passage?
Yes. Shall we do the passage leading into it when he
Let's do it.
about the maids? So this is before she takes him into the room. Sie sah ihn an, wenn hin und wieder in die Küche kam, um ein Glas zum Wassertrinken für seinen Vater zu holen oder einen Auftrag seiner Mutter auszurichten. Manchmal schrieb sie in der vertrackten Stellung seitlich vom Küchenschrank einen Brief und holte sich die Eingebungen von Karls Gesicht. Manchmal hielt sie die Augen mit der Hand verdeckt, dann drang keine Anrede zu ihr. Manchmal kniete sie in ihrem engen Zimmerchen neben der Küche und betete zu einem hölzernen Kreuz. Karl beobachtete sie dann nur mit Scheu im Vorübergehen durch die Spalte der ein wenig geöffneten Tür. Manchmal jagte sie in der Küche herum und fuhr wie eine Hexe lachend zurück, wenn Karl ihr in den Weg kam. Manchmal schloss sie die Küchentüre, wenn Karl eingetreten war, und behielt die Klinke so lange in der Hand, bis er wegzugehen verlangte. Manchmal holte sie Sachen, die er gar nicht haben wollte, und drückte sie ihm schweigend in die Hände. Einmal aber sagte sie Karl und führte ihn, der noch über die unerwartete Ansprache staunte, unter Grimassen seufzend in ihr Zimmerchen.
Oh.
Yeah, so I love that theatricality of all the different gestures and movements, and
It is full of physical gestures. What do they reveal about the relationship?
I mean, it's quite a nice, in a quite a few short sentences, a nice way of kind of establishing their relationship, which seems it's all kind of different. She watches him, he spies on her, and like this, and she kind of gives him things that he doesn't want. And it's sort of like this relationship over time by just saying manchmal over and over again. I find it a wonderful setup of, and there's almost no words being, I mean, at least in the text, there's no actual dialogue there, right? And it's suggested that they basically never speak. And then she says Karl, and then takes him into her room.
And it's just his name. And he follows.
And he follows.
Yeah.
And lets her do what she wants to do.
And has then to deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
But still, even when he goes on that ship, because she became pregnant by him, and his parents sent him away, he accepts this role of being moved, to come back to that, what you said earlier, by others. Not having his agency, not even taking it or trying to take it. And when he speaks up, it is not for him, but for the stoker.
Yeah, that's right.
And he trusts him.
Yeah, he trusts him a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems very unmotivated to trust him like that, right? Yeah. And it's I mean, I'm sure you talked in another video about nationality maybe, but there seems to be, he puts all his trust in kind of a shared nationality or a shared language, yeah.
But then at the same time, when he meets his uncle, he trusts the uncle less than the stoker.
Yeah, which is very interesting.
And it has also bodily connotations to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, the other fascinating aspect is the intimacy and the gestures of intimacy between men, both with the uncle and with the stoker, and what they reveal. I mean, it's almost melodramatic, right? Like they start crying and they, yeah. I mean, the stoker, he takes the stoker's hand to say goodbye, and he like traces the stoker's fingers with his own fingers and like puts it to his cheek and then starts crying.
And it's the gestures of a much younger boy than he actually is. I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it's also kind of the uncle that first kind of pushes him into that role by initiating this kind of contact, by kissing him and by hugging him and by starting to cry about this. I wouldn't call it a reunion because I don't think they've met before that. It's just somehow the familial bond has to do all that work.
Yeah. And at the very end, when Carl then finally manages to leave the ship with his uncle, he looks at the uncle, but the uncle doesn't look back at him, but looks to the sea, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he wonders whether the stoker wouldn't have been a better companion than his uncle. That's right.
His choice.
Yeah.
So this text is quite often staged in theatre, which I find quite interesting. Why do you think that is with your expertise in performance?
Well, the easy answer would be that Kafka is very popular, right? And it will draw audiences, which is always, I mean, that's just, you know, if you want to draw audiences to your pieces, that's not, that's important, right? So let's start there. But I mean, all the things we just talked about actually is I mean, a rich material to be staged, right? Even the little scene with the maid and all the gestures that are happening. And if I was a theater director, I would love that, you know.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fascinating adaptation by das Deutsches Theater, which plays with that very interestingly by making the shadows very big. You saw the trailer, right? Yeah. So I thought that was a really nice way of thinking about or highlighting the gestures. And yeah.
And his loss of agency as well, and his loneliness to a certain extent. So the stage offers a lot of possibilities to make that grasp that visually.
That's right. Yeah. And also they draw in the drawings that Kafka used to make. So if you don't know the drawings, please look them up. But you know, that's often also very physical, kind of awkward movements. So in the theater, the actor on stage kind of performs a movement which then on the back in the shadows forms with a table and a chair certain one of Kafka's drawings, which is a beautiful way of thinking about.
Wow.
Yeah, and also those objects actually not being in the space, but only being protected on the screen. So you have all those kind of awkward movements as we talked about, kind of, you know, and like not quite grasping the objects in the right way, kind of the staging.
Emphasized in stage and even made bigger.
Yeah.
Because theatre offers the possibility to do so, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, that's great examples of, of what you can do with it. Actually, I was surprised, if I may say another thing, is that often actually the spaces in Kafka's texts are very small and contained, and this means already an awkwardness between human bodies.
Confusing.
Yeah. And like. It's interesting because in the Stoker, he's both called like Kleiner, which might have to do with his age, and I'm not sure it says something about his stature. At the same time, his legs are described about as long, especially when he fails to trample on the rat. And so I was kind of interested in, you know, even if you have a long body. Like, how does that work in these kind of contained spaces, right?
Wow, there's much more to explore. Thank you very much.
Of course, yeah.
Thank
you for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Great, me too.
And for those of you who are listening, we will link the theatre adaptation we mentioned in the description box below, where you will also find a link to our website. So please search for Oxford German Classic to find out more about our essay competition. But for now, bye and tschüss.
Tschüss.